tries to push damage.
Now, Boros Charm, one of the best quote-unquote counter spells in Standard if you're trying to stop a removal spell. Because you know what? If you aren't stopping a removal spell, you can hit him in the face.
Right.
Here we go, mana versus mana. Turn 2, Zack drops a Avacyn's Pilgrim.
Yeah, it looks like Zack is kind of loaded up on those buddy lands with the Rootbound Crag and the Clifftop Retreat. He doesn't... It might, to me, when I see players lead out on 2 buddy lands, sometimes I'm wondering how many lands they actually have in their hand. You know, it looks like with the Avacyn's Pilgrim, he might still be able to make a fine play here, but let's see how it plays.
Both players dropping a turn 2 mana accelerator. Not the ideal for either of them. We see another buddy. Are we gonna see a Boros? Oh, Domri Rod fights yours.
Wow, and so Zack, in this matchup, he really... That's a really interesting way of how he evaluates his role. Rather than drawing extra cards, what he wants to do is he wants to time walk both players. He used the Domri Rod just to make the 2 Avacyn's Pilgrims fight each other, basically saying that his mana is less relevant than Brian's mana.
That seems like a very reasonable conclusion.
Well, yeah, Zack's deck can really operate on 4 lands for an entire game, whereas Brian's deck wants to get to 5, to 6, to 7.
There are 2 lands and an Arbor Elf revealed by Grizzly Salvage, as well as another Grizzly Salvage and an Unburial Rites. So the question really is Arbor Elf or land, and the thing is, the bonus Unburial Rites put into the graveyard, but no fodder for it other than possibly mana.
Yeah, Brian's got to be pretty happy to see that Unburial Rites in the yard, and it'll probably come up. In this sort of matchup, there's a lot of creatures trading. Naya's going to be trying to attack. Brian will be really happy to maybe, play a Thragtusk, trade it with one of his creatures, and then get it back with the Unburial Rites. What's interesting to me is whether or not he wants the acceleration that Arbor Elf offers, or the late game utility that Gavony Township offers.
Goes for the Cavern.
He takes neither. He takes Cavern of Souls. Possibly he wants to ensure that he has triple white when the time comes.
I mean, it's a way to cast Obzedat.
Right, so he has a couple creatures that are really hard to cast. It's Obzedat and Angel of Serenity.
Domri finds a Thundermaw Hellkite.
Right, and the Thundermaw is one of the reasons that Naya still has a lot of game against a deck like Junk Reanimator. Junk, while it has a lot of really strong cards, has a soft spot in its deck to flyers. It's possibly a soft spot that Shadowborn Demon has helped plug, but still Thundermaw Hellkite is a really potent weapon against the Junk Reanimator deck.
Yeah, Thundermaw Hellkite, one of the best 5-drops that I can remember in a very long time.
Yep, this is a kind of, it really hit the scene immediately when it came down. It's a great answer to Lingering Souls. Actually leaving at the end of the summer, just gonna have, 1 year in the format. Because as it wasn't reprinted in M14.
That makes me sad. I just really love this card.
Interesting to note, though, on that turn, when Zack played a 4th land, he had another buddy land tapped and activated his Domri Rod. He did not have a creature to play. That means no Flinthoof Boar, no Scavenging Ooze, no Luxodon Smiter, no Boros Reckoner, no Voice of Resurgence.
I wonder if he's just packing Thundermaw after Thundermaw.
Right, that's the scary news, because he has a full hand. So he doesn't have a ton of lands because he didn't even have the Shock land to make these come into play untapped. It's kind of a scary, he could have a very frightening hand.
We see another plus. What are you gonna show us? Nothing.
All right, it looks like he has also a Bonfire of the Damned.
Bonfire for 1. Okay. Do you have another land? Is it going to be 1 more buddy?
I don't think he has the land.
That's sad. Now, perhaps there's a land on top. There are not very many spells in Zack Canner's deck.
Yeah, there's actually, with the Domri in play and that Bonfire cast, there's only 6 cards in the deck that top card could be other than a land. I would say it's a safe bet to see that land 5's coming. The one question is, will it be untapped?
We can see the Cavern of Souls that he picked earlier, helping him cast that Obzedat.
Right, so Brian actually now gets the first, non-mana creature on the board here. That's a spot that Zack can't be too happy to be in. Remember how all his creatures tend to be 3/3s and 4/4s? Well, Obzedat's a 5/5.
We have an altar revealed by Domri Rod. I don't know what the card altar was.
I believe it's a Huntmaster of the Fells. It's an altar on a checklist card.
It's a checklist card. You're right. Okay, so we see the Thundermaw come on in. Brian Braun-Duin, Mr. BBD himself, down to 16. He's going to be back up to 18 in a moment when the Obzedat returns. Now this clock, that is 7 damage every turn if he's on the offense. And plus that 2 life gain is not anything to slouch at.
Yeah, I mean, unless Zack has a second Thundermaw to join the party, it's probable that Brian has the faster clock to race here. He's starting at higher life points. He gets to gain life, and right now they're hitting for the same amount. But that said, as you mentioned before, if I'm Brian, I'm putting Zack on the second Thundermaw Hellkite.
And we see the Domri is attacked by Obzedat. This is actually a life push for, a life gain here for Zack of sorts, because now he's not at 9. He's not going to be threatened to be at 7, and instead, what he's going to be doing is in a real race that he wasn't in moments ago.
Yeah, my thought here is that Brian's recognizing that Zack probably has another dragon, that Brian's opting not to do the race strategy.
Okay, he makes a wolf with Garrick. He has an Arbor Elf, and goodbye to Obzadar. It'll come back in a second. Remember, there's a Huntmaster in Zack's hand to create a little army of one wolf and then the Huntmaster itself, gain a little bit of life. This is a very interesting race situation.
Yeah, so we know that Zack has the Huntmaster of the Fells, and I actually do see his hand. He does have the second Thundermaw Hellkite.
If he has Boros Charm and Gore-Clan Rampager, Zack can just kill Brian right now.
And that is that combo you're talking about. It helps him win games that he otherwise can't win. It looks like...
Oh my god, I think I see a Boros Charm.
There's a charm. But instead, he's going for the second Thundermaw Hellkite. You know, kind of that telltale thing when he didn't have any of the other creatures. He's going to drop Brian to a low 8 life points. With that Boros Charm, Brian's going to have a lot to answer.
Okay, back will come the Obzadot. Obzadot brings him to 10. It is now 10 to 12. Now, in Brian's deck, there are no ways to add in damage right now. I don't think I see anything. Oh, pardon me, there's a Gavney Township in his graveyard, so there is another Gavney Township in his deck.
Right.
Is that enough? Should he draw a Gavney Township?
And I'm still really interested, Brian, with his line, when he chose to attack the Domri rat last turn, he really took away his advantage in the race. You know, Zack's at 12, he could have been at 7 here. Brian, not a new Junk Reanimator player, certainly has a plan. We'll see what it is in this matchup.
Well, I mean, I see 7 mana in play. One possible choice is Angel of Serenity. An attack I see coming from the Arbor Elf, so
8 damage comes across. It's going to put Zack to 4, but 4 is not 0. Brian is facing down a lethal attack here, and that's before the Boros Charm that we know about.
Let's see what Brian has in addition to this. He's dead on the board, so he has to have something.
Right.
A Restoration Angel would be a possibility.
Restoration Angel. Fiend Hunter would also be a possibility here.
He leaves Obzadot out. I think there's going to be a Resto.
Yeah, a Restoration Angel, and actually, so between one Thundermaw Hellkite attack and a Boros Charm, that would leave Brian at 1 life after the chump block of Restoration Angel.
And Brian's like, nothing. No, I got nothing. He was basically, I think, trying to say, hey, I've got a Restoration Angel. You know, if you come on in, you're not going to kill me, then I'll kill you. You better not do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a soft bluff, because even if Zack believes him, believes the bluff that he has a Restoration Angel, Zack's play is still to attack. You know, Zack doesn't have another line. The reason you bluff is to try to trick someone into playing the wrong line. But when Zack's already locked in, he only has one set of things he can do.
Another thing you can do when you make a play like that is you can just hope that they take the ball and run in with their imagination into some sort of ridiculous scenario that doesn't exist.
Right. So we see, so Zack Canner up the first game. Remember, this match is for a spot in the top 8.
In the sideboard for Zack, he already has 3 Scavenging Ooze in the main deck, so there are no more Scavenging Ooze in the sideboard, but he does, in addition to that, have 2 Rest in Peace. He is really, this might be Brian Braun-Duin's potential nightmare in this final round.
Yeah, one of the questions is whether or not, so it's interesting, Rest in Peace was typically a good card against Junk Reanimator. In my opinion, it's not as good as Ground Seal, because Junk can always play like a mid-range deck, but Junk right now has got to be aware that his opponent has a Scavenging Ooze. You know, Brian knows that he may just become a good stuff deck, almost just eschewing his graveyard plan, and if he does that, Zack probably doesn't even want the Rest in Peace. So it's one of those sideboard trick games. You know, each person is kind of trying to meta on how they think the other person is going to sideboard. In that sense, Zack might leave the Rest in Pieces in the sideboard. He might bring them in. It all depends on what he thinks Brian's doing.
One of the cards I definitely like in his sideboard is Selesnya Charm. Whichever path that Brian Braun-Duin goes down, Selesnya Charm is a useful card. The Selesnya Charm being able to remove a large creature. That large creature could be a demon. That large creature could be a Thragtusk. That large creature could be an angel. The Angel of Serenity specifically. That's a useful ability, whether or not Brian Braun-Duin is on the Reanimator side or not.
Yeah, the necessity term, I believe, it's Destroy or Exile is the question.
Exile.
It's exile. So that's
an exile.
It's an exile effect, which is another good weapon against Junk Reanimator.
And if he's not in the situation where he needs to use it for the effect of exile. The +2/+2 trample ability is also relevant. There's lots of uses on that one. And you're right about the rest in peace kind of cop and robber dodge, you know.
Yeah,
am I going to rob this bank or that bank, cop, or I'm going to rob somebody tonight? And you got to decide where you want to go.
Yeah, other than that, I think Zack's main, he doesn't have too many high impact cards to side in. I think I really like a lot of the things he's already playing. I think you'll see maybe those charms come in. Boros charms could really stand to be upgraded, I think. In this matchup, I don't think they do enough in the matchup.
If Braun-Duin had more removal style effects, the Boros charm would be more valuable. I mean, it still could be used to counter, so to speak, a removal spell of some sort, but when you only have 2 of the modes that you're likely to maybe make use of, it is a lot less valuable.
When you think about how Brian removes cards, the ways he has some. He has a Garruk Relentless, 1 Putrefy, 1 Shadowborn Demon. Boros Charm will protect your guys from that, but when you think of the other ways he removes, it's Angel of Serenity, Fiend Hunter. None of these, these things Boros Charm doesn't really help against.
If you're just joining us, I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Matthias Hunt. This is the StarCityGames.com Open Series featuring the Invitational. 16 rounds of the Invitational are done. We have a top 8. These 2 players you see before you, Braun-Duin, Zack Canner, playing Junk Reanimator and Naya Midrange respectively. These 2 players are playing for a top 8 in the largest Star City Games Open that we have yet held.
Yeah. And you have to imagine that for these players, the grind is really starting to set in for them. Remember, this is their 11th round of Standard today. And a lot of them, Braun-Duin, we know, this was his 2nd day in a row. He played the Invitational yesterday. If you think about that, this would be his 19th round of Magic in 2 days. That can really wear on a player.
Absolutely. From another way of looking at this as well, we have had 27 rounds of Magic thus far, with more to come.
I mean, so 19 over 2 days, what would you say is the largest number, in 2 days, largest number of rounds you played? Winning a Grand Prix is only 18.
That's a lot of Magic.
So this is more than being the winner of a Grand Prix right now.
We see a turn 1 mana accelerator in the form of Avacyn's Pilgrim. Last game, we saw both of these players play a less exciting turn 2 mana accelerator, but this turn, Braun-Duin accelerates, Zack does not.
Well, what the acceleration does for Brian right now is that really both players just kind of trade threats back and forth. We saw that Naya really has the meat of its curve between 2 and 4. The meat of Brian's spells are more 4s and 5s, so the Avacyn's Pilgrim helps him basically curve at the same time as the Naya deck.
Turn 2, he's 2 damage from a Temple Garden. Zack Canner going to do something. What is it going to be? Voice of Resurgence. A card that I think of as much less strong in this matchup. Yeah. But he could just simply have that be like the 58th or 59th card of his 75 that are going to be in this.
Yeah, this is one of the few matchups where it's the 2-drop he doesn't want as much. He'd much prefer it to be a scavenging use. Voice as a 2/2 will get outclassed very early in this matchup. Where it still will shine is when it turns back into a token. If this gets into a ground stall, the Voice of Resurgence can once again become a big threat.
Yeah, I mean, if he's racing against Obsidian, for example, if that moment happens, a Voice of Resurgence can be a great way to help make that race not be so terrible. We see a Restoration Angel hit play, 3/4. He does that during his main phase so that he does not trigger the Voice of Resurgence. The first week that Voice was legal in larger tournaments, I have to tell you, I saw a lot of elementals. There were elementals everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, and that happened to us, I think, when we were playtesting, actually, for the Pro Tour Dragon's Maze. There'd be games, where you'd be like, okay, just out of habit, pass, draw resto, pass the turn, and then you just look at them and like, oh no. I actually just did that, and then you have to think, well, how bad do I want this Restoration Angel? I really was hoping to play a spell this turn, but I really don't want to give him a Star.
We see a Restoration Angel joined by a Thragtusk. Zack Canner on his side of the table had added a Scavenging Ooze. Yeah. Ooze, really, really good, usually in this matchup, but you can see no graveyards yet for either player.
This is a commitment actually to the early game for Braun-Duin. Usually when you play a Restoration Angel and Thragtusk, you want to play them in the opposite order to get the tremendous value out of the 2 of them. Right now, Brian is just that it's more important for him to start pushing damage.
Now look at this moment. Brian trying to decide whether or not to attack with his Thragtusk or not. The Thragtusk, if it comes in, ends up having to fight those other, could be blocked by those other creatures and killed.
And we'll see that. I think it looks like something that Brian's just fine with. And as you see, Zack doesn't even want to trade. He actually is looking to race back. He just wants to turn the Voice of Resurgence into an elemental.
Okay.
Zack thought it was hitting the bin, but I think we're going to see another Restoration Angel or something come up.
A abrupt decay after the block is declared, but before the Voice of Resurgence has the trigger happen. This is going to mean that Zack will not gain 1 life because the Voice of Resurgence is not yet in the yard.
And so remember, the voice token is currently a 2/2 the die signifies.
Yeah, that is not counters on it. It is a reminder die.
Right. It is important to note because I believe he does play Gavany. Oh, actually, he does not play Gavany Townships. So that would make sense then.
Okay. We see, I think that's going to be a bonfire for 1, clearing out the 2 mana dorks.
Yeah, so Zack's keeping Brian off Angel of Serenity and off his very large spells, but right now Brian's at a very comfortable life total. Zack has really been unable to mount a lot of pressure in this game.
Absolutely. Now, there are 3 points of power on Zack's side of the table. Together, they could block a Thragtusk and kill it, presuming no tricks, but instead the Elemental just hops in the way.
Yeah, well, Zack, it really seems that Zack wants to reach his 5-drops right now. He just can't afford to chump with the Avacyn's Pilgrim. Even when his 5-drops are as strong as Thundermaw Hellkite, though, he's very far behind.
Huntmaster, and I think I see a Blasphemous Act in Zack's hand. I'm not 100% sure of that, though.
Okay, well, Blasphemous Act is a card in his sideboard. In this matchup, if he really... It sometimes can get cast. There's a lot of creature trading actually that happens, so the card will probably still cost most of his turn when he wants to cast Blasphemous Act. What it shows to me is he doesn't want a sweeper, but he's hoping to Boros Reckoner Blasphemous Act his opponent.
Absolutely. Okay. Here comes the team.
Yeah, we saw a second Restoration Angel there, that time doing his trick with Thragtusk, 5 life, an extra beast. Braun-Duin has a huge army now. This is with 27 life, he doesn't have to worry about the counterattack. It's going to be a very rough block for Zack Hanner.
I think we're just going to end up seeing a... there we go, the double chump on the Thragtusk to kill it. He takes 9 and drops to 1.
Right, so the Thragtusk is down now, but Zack, down 27 to 1. He has to find blockers for 4 creatures just to stay alive. He does have another Huntmaster, but because all these creatures are 3 power, everything has to be blocked.
Yeah, there are no Thragtusks in his deck, so he can't get a massive life jump.
Right, so we see there, Brian, as we mentioned before, not even a Reanimator deck in that matchup. You know, there were no Unburial Rights at all. What he did is he played a turn 1 mana creature, and he just started making threats.
Yep, and Zack Hanner did drop a Scavenging Ooze in a fairly early part of the game, but with nothing in the graveyard. Nothing to actually eat. The Scavenging Ooze just sat there, and in fact there was one moment where there was going to be a creature going to the graveyard, and Braun-Duin casually kills the Scavenging Ooze just to keep Zack from getting 1 life. Yeah. It wasn't even about the Scavenging Ooze being a scary thing. It was just, you know what? I'm gonna just kill that because 1 life, that's, I don't want you to have it.
Yeah, the Scavenging Ooze in that game was, you're right, it was really underwhelming as it actually didn't answer Brian's board. It never can block a Restoration Angel, and it has to do a lot of work before it can profitably interact with the Thragtusk. As we saw there, Zack managed to at least get his Scavenging Ooze Abrupt Decayed, which means like he at least got a card out of it, which I think is more than he would have gotten in a lot of situations.
Yeah, now, Zack, reconfiguring after that, Braun-Duin, he walked into this tournament knowing that there were going to be Scavenging Oozes everywhere. So he, was prepared for the possibility of an ooze.
So one of the things we were talking about yesterday was when a new card comes out that's hateful to your strategy, there's some cards that make you you just have to figure out how to play around and be aware of, and some that make you move off the strategy. You know, our comparison we said is that, sometimes you're playing Storm and people start running Rule of Law. And sometimes it's more like, you're playing Junk and someone's running Scavenging Ooze, and we're just saying that's a really different level of hate. Scavenging Ooze is fine, you can play around it. It is inconvenient that it's in deck lists, but as long as you really believe that your deck is good, it's probably still good in the face of this card. It's not that kind of thing it's not a Kataki to an Affinity. It's not, that card just beats their deck by itself.
One of the reasons why it doesn't beat Junk Reanimator by itself is that Junk Reanimator, in many ways, has, like we talked about before, become junk with Reanimator, it's
Right.
prepared to fight a fight regardless of whether it's playing a reanimation game. If it was running the acidic slime style of deck, what that was doing back in that moment was just trying to essentially smash your resources, because it would definitely get out an Angel of Serenity and it would take things to that level. Whereas now, instead, it's going value from Thragtusk, value from the Demon of Shadowborn Demon, you know, value from Obsidian.
You know, and I think this is really when Junk came onto the scene. It was strong for the reason you're talking about. The original Unburial Rites deck that was so popular was the Angel of Glory's Rise combo deck. It was a human deck which was all about mulching, grizzly salvaging, putting lots of creatures into the deck, casting an amazing Unburial Rites on an Angel of Glory's Rise, and then boom, winning the game. Problem with the deck is that when people played Rest in Pieces, the deck out of the board was pretty bad. Strategy was to board in Thragtusk and cross its fingers. Eventually people realized that, you know, hey, you can get the value out of that Unburial Rites without having to play a deck that's that weak to graveyard hate by just playing good cards. And I think
Absolutely.
That's really where Junk Reanimator came from.
Well, if we think back to a card very similar to Scavenging Ooze, Withered Wretch. Withered Wretch, very similar, black for a 2/2 zombie cleric, 1 colorless to activate to remove a card from any graveyard. That card by itself often tore up the reanimation decks of yesteryear, but those reanimation decks, they were dedicated reanimation decks.
Right, that's
they would
how
say,
they won.
yeah, they would say, I'm going to entomb this scary creature, and then I'm going to bring it back to life.
I mean,
that is not what Junk Reanimator does.
Wait, if you think about it, no one plays Human Reanimator anymore. Like, it's really fallen out of the scene, but imagine right now that a player was playing Human Reanimator right now. If I was playing that deck and I saw a Scavenging Ooze on the opposing side of the
I would
table,
cry.
Well, you can't combo through it if their opponent's leaving up green mana, so what you'd have to do is you'd have to first Fiend Hunt it, and then combo, and you only have 4 Fiend Hunters in your deck, and really the way you usually found them was, unfortunately, putting them in your graveyard.
Yep.
So you'd have to naturally draw one, then hit the Scavenging Ooze, and really hope that they don't, you know, Searing Spear your Fiend Hunter. And it's like, that level of hate, you know, that's not what's happened to this Junk Reanimator deck, because it's not as linear of a deck as many Reanimator decks we've seen.
So if these decks have both shifted towards, from the Naya deck, moving from an aggro deck into this mid-range aggro deck, leaning even a little bit more mid-range, and this Junk Reanimator deck leaning towards just being a more fair deck, they're basically kind of going to like this. I'm gonna run right at you head first, and you're gonna run at me, right at me, head first, and we're gonna bash skulls like 2 rams on a mountain and see who comes out.
Yeah, and we've said that before about Standard right now. This is probably the most mid-range Standard has been in a long time, possibly ever. You know, the top decks are all just, you know, good 3, 4, and 5 drops that just are very efficient, powerful plays.
We see a Voice of Resurgence face off versus the classic turn 2 1 mana accelerator.
Right, so Brian hoping to do a repeat, I think, of our last game where he just matched threat for threat with Naya, but due to his mana acceleration was able to get bigger threats out first.
We see a Boros Reckoner join the table. Zack takes 2 from his land to get it out.
Well, yeah, Zack has to make a creature every turn, and, you know, Brian's going to hopefully keep pace. If they can keep pace, Brian believes he has the advantage because his creatures do get bigger in the end.
Wow, there we go.
Yeah, no,
Putrefy?
yeah, Brian had to do that on his own
Yep.
turn because of the Voice of Resurgence, but he's keeping his life total pretty high by answering, you know, those 3 power creatures that Zack makes.
Attack for 2 from Voice of Resurgence. 4th land, Scavenging Ooze.
All right, so Zack with just these efficient plays, you know, Scavenging Ooze, Voice of Resurgence, Boros Reckoner. We're going to see if Brian can go over the top, and that's the first card that he's going to use right there that he's going to use to do it.
We're going to see Zack Canner probably make a 3/3 Ooze here, and then also probably kill that Putrefy.
Yeah, just for good measure. Yeah, he can take out the Putrefy for good measure. If he
doesn't.
doesn't matter. Brian doesn't actually have a way to get it back.
Yeah, no Dead Bridge chance.
So Brian, saying he did make the Thragtusk there, and this is where Junk can still be a really efficient deck, is that Brian can Restoration Angel Thragtusk and really pull himself far ahead.
We see a +1 to kill that Thragtusk. Brian knew that could happen. He did that on purpose.
Well, yeah, I mean, not only does it help trade there to stop an Angel Thragtusk, but it provides 2 more creatures for Braun-Duin, for Zack to get with Scavenging Ooze. Something with Scavenging Ooze upgrades from that 2/2 to or from that 3/3 to a 5/5.
Wow.
Things become a lot more relevant there. You know, that's a much scarier threat.
Wow, a mulch. We had not seen that yet this match. Only 2 in the deck. I had kind of wondered if Braun-Duin had sideboarded it out. There is, look at that, double. That's both of his Angels of Serenity. Does he have the 5 mana Unburial Rights to make it happen right now while Zack Canner is tapped out?
Well, Brian's plays are really interesting here. He mulched into the Scavenging Ooze, trying to look for some more action. He actually did have the Restoration Angel in his hand when he made that Thragtusk block, which to me seems that he wasn't particularly interested in the Thragtusk Restoration Angel combo.
We see an attack here with a potential Pilgrim and a 3/3 Beast.
Yeah, he's leaving up that Restoration Angel mana.
Now he's just trying to get that. Okay, what do we got? Putrefy there.
All
Putrefy
right.
to kill the Scavenging Ooze. The Angel of Serenity still just fine. And then the other creature, now a 1/1, ends up dying
That was
in combat with the Pilgrim.
Really heads up play by Brian. Zack got a little greedy in trying to put the Voice of Resurgence token on Brian's Abyssin's Pilgrim.
He takes some pain. There's another Ooze.
And
The
this-
Ooze has 1,
This
2,
Ooze is hungry.
3,
It has
4,
7.
5, 6. You're correct. 7 targets.
That makes the Ooze bigger. Very quickly, it'll be bigger than any creature in Brian's deck. With the Kessig Wolf run, it could be a possibly lethal threat. Brian has already used 2 of his Putrefies.
Okay, and we're going to
What?
see the Fiend Hunter come down, target the Scavenging Ooze. In response, Zack Canner gains some life, and he makes a few of those really scary
Yeah.
creatures. The Thragtusk and the Angels of Serenity get out of there.
All right, so 2 Oozes now taken care of for Brian, and actually the graveyards are a little less stocked, so that, he's averted a couple of the really scary Scavenging Oozes from Zack's deck, but Brian is running pretty low on resources right now.
Only 1 Scavenging Ooze left in Zack Canner's deck, and here's a Thundermaw Hellkite coming over for 5, knocks Braun-Duin to 16.
Yeah, it's going to be a close race here. Both players have 5 power in play, so you'd think in favor of Brian as he's starting at a higher life total. However, Zack does have the Kessig Wolf run, so he right now can Wolf run for 3, and even if he floods out, he can actually turn this into a 2-turn clock already. And he can make it 8 and 8 by using all his mana.
Now remember, he can flicker with a Restoration Angel, his Fiend Hunter, and eat that dragon during combat. And now that would give Zack back a Scavenging Ooze. He might not do that, but it's an option for him.
Right, and I think it seems like Brian's going to wait until Zack goes for that kill and then turn the tides at the last second.
O-Ring. This is going to be devastating. That O-Ring is going to target something, and the Resto Angel is going to save it.
Yeah, and here we see it right away. As soon as the O-Ring comes down, yeah, Restoration Angel is going to flicker Fiend Hunter. Fiend Hunter comes back. It's going to find a new target. That target is Thundermaw Hellkite, and the race tables have turned in Brian's favor.
Now, that still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 targets. 5 targets remain that would grow Zack Canner's Ooze.
Right, and he can grow the Ooze, and that's great that he does have all these targets. The harder part is that he has a lot of damage to deal with. And we can remember that Scavenging Ooze actually does gain life when it exiles creatures. So, Zack earlier got 3 life gain when he just exiled those Angels and Thragtusk. That may affect the race, but Brian has a lot of chump blockers available to him.
Kessig Wolf Run could make some math problems for that.
Okay, that's fair. The question is how it stacks up. It's going to still be a close race here. So looking at it, okay, the Scavenging Ooze becomes a 5/5. Because with all the mana, he can make it into an 8/5 trample, and he'd be at 11. So the 11 life is enough to survive for another turn, even with the attack. But using all his mana, I think still leaves him vulnerable to Braun-Duin. Zack's gonna need a little more help to win the race.
Okay.
So we see right here on the end step, almost all the creatures being eaten to Scavenging Ooze, and he gets his first untap. Sorry, actually, I suppose the race actually may be in Zack's favor. I didn't get who was attacking first, but yeah, I think this does seem pretty good for Zack.
Smiter and a pass. Next turn, he can eat the remainder of the creatures. 2 creatures? 1 creature?
Just
one
right
left.
now. And which is why he couldn't make the attack, is because he actually couldn't make the Scavenging Ooze survive. Brian could throw all his he could throw a Restoration Angel Beast in front of it and just kill the Scavenging Ooze. Zack really can't let that happen right now.
Grizzly Salvage into a Scavenging Ooze, very aggressive. Oh, wow,
But
Gavany Township.
But it's worth it. It's worth every bit of it when Brian finds that Gavany Township. And with the mana creatures, he's gonna start townshipping almost immediately.
Brian still has to do a little bit of math, but Gavany Township, for 4 mana plus using it, everybody gets +1/+1 counters. Now, gosh, this is still a very, very close
Yeah, that Gavany Township, basically, Brian's going to force Zack to start attacking. Brian has complete inevitability. If he believes he can successfully block this turn through the Kessig Wolf run, or for this point in the game, it's going to be. Then now it's on Zack.
I'm a little surprised that Zack didn't use the end of that turn to also eat that Unburial Rites in the yard. I hope that doesn't come back to bite him.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you have to remember with Scavenging Ooze is that just because it wants to eat creatures, it actually can eat things that are not creatures. It just doesn't gain a life or a counter when it does so.
And here we see the first activation of Gavany Township. And he's out of dice.
Yep, this is going to go so well for Brian. I'm surprised that Zack didn't press an attack, even though the attack is pretty bad. I almost feel like Zack has to press an attack here. Not pressing an attack, I don't see how he wins.
Yeah.
Once that Gavany Township gets tapped for a 3rd time, there's just no way that he can push through enough damage.
I mean, right now he might be hoping to get, I'm thinking maybe a Bonfire, something like that to make that happen.
Right, Bonfire will get him the game, to be fair. That is the top deck that can save you from a lot of positions that you otherwise can't win.
Braun-Duin has the only flyer on the table right now, and he has to be thinking to himself, is this the point to start going for the kill? You can see him counting. It's like he's got an invisible abacus there, going through the math, trying to decide, is it time to send one creature in, the Restoration Angel? Is it time to send everybody in? Is it time to sit back?
Yeah, Brian can afford to play this pretty conservatively here. If he knows then a stock Naya deck list, which I'm sure a player that Brian does, he probably knows that the only card he really has to be worried about right now is Bonfire of the Damned. Naya's almost an all-creatures deck.
And he goes for a single attack with Restoration Angel for 5 damage, because after he lays the creature that he has in his hand, pumps the Gavany Township, and now he's got 2, 5, 8, 11, and a total of 16 toughness on his side of the table.
He's crossing his hand, he's saying no Bonfire. And
That
it was
is
not.
it.
That'll be Braun-Duin winning 2-1 over Zack Canner, which should be locking him up a spot in the top 8.
Right. Braun-Duin, he wrote an article this week telling people, you know what, Reanimator is not deck. Look at that, a little fist pump. He's in the top 8, high five to a friend, and he's showing everybody this archetype is not dead, facing down 2 Scavenging Oozes and continuing to show that it takes more than that to knock out this basically huge Goliath of a deck.